are on Outside 50 again, a podcast brought to you by usfootynews.com. And we're changing the curve a little bit today. We've moved from some of the players and we're going on to another important part of USAFL football, and that is the umpires. And we have two very special guests on the show today. Firstly, I'll introduce Rick Shaibani, who's over there in LA. How are you doing, Rick?
Doing well, Kraz. It's been kind of a chaotic week, but we're getting through it, aren't we?
We all are. We all are. And our first special guest, inducted into the USAFL Hall of Fame in 2019, and a long-time umpire all the way across the country, is Steve Arnott. Hey, Steve, how you doing?
Hey, Kraz, doing well, mate. Hey, Rick, how are you?
Doing well. How are you, mate?
Good.
And our other special guest is a guy that I've known for many, many years, from the first days that I started playing down in Atlanta. Also a life member of the USAFL in 2011, is Jeff Persson. Hey, Jeff.
Hey, Kraz. Great to be here. Thanks for having me.
Glad to have you on board, Jeff.
Well, guys, as we know, football's basically come to a bit of a standstill here, not only here in the US, but around the world a little bit, although the AFL is about to jump into their season as we record this. But all we can do is talk about some of the history now and what has been going on. Importantly, the USAFL and the USAFL Umpires Association have really put it together over the last couple of years, and we certainly want to talk about that. But before we get into that association and what your roles are within that organisation, how about we go back a little bit? And I think we'll start with Steve, because he's maybe been around a little bit longer. Steve, you came over here in the 90s, right?
That's right. I came to Minnesota in 1991.
And what brought you to town?
Well, actually, my ex-wife brought me to town. She worked for 3M and worked for 3M Pharmaceuticals in Sydney, and was offered a job here in St. Paul. And we thought, well, an opportunity to come and live in the US. It doesn't happen very often. And so we came in 91, and she became a permanent resident. I became a permanent resident. And the longer you stay in one place, the harder it is to go back. And St. Paul's a pretty nice place to grow up with, raise kids. And once you get used to the weather, it's really nice.
I assume you had never seen snow before moving to the US?
No, that's not true, actually. I had actually skied in the snowy mountains in Australia. But
Okay.
the difference there is that it was just below freezing, and you don't get much powder in Australia. It doesn't get cold enough. But my introduction actually was the Halloween snowstorm of 91. We had around about a bit over 2 feet of snow in about 24 hours here in the Twin Cities. So, yeah, I had never seen that before.
Yeah, I bet.
And it took you a few years, Steve, to get into footy. Now, I know from talking to you just before that you first umpired a game in 99. Was that there in Minnesota or somewhere else?
Yeah, what happened was I had started studying law in Sydney part-time, and when I came, I was the accompanying spouse, so I couldn't work, but I could study as much as I liked, so it made sense to go to law school. So I was in law school through March of 94, the summer of 94, and then I sat the bar exam, became a lawyer, started my practice, so I was pretty busy doing all that kind of stuff. And then to be honest, I really don't remember the circumstances. I think I met Plugger somehow, somewhere, or he got in touch with me or something and said, well, why don't you umpire again? So I thought, well, I can do that now. So I just started traveling around umpiring.
So had you umpired in Australia before?
Yeah, I'd started umpiring when I moved to Sydney in 1987. I had a friend of ours who was umpiring in Sydney, said, why don't you come along and have a run? So I thought, okay, why not? And so I started umpiring in Sydney in 1988. So I was doing that for 3 years before we came to the US.
So maybe that first game was a Milwaukee game or something like that where Plugger was?
It could have been something like that. And so there was no Minnesota team then. So I would just go down to Kansas City, umpire at tournaments and games, go down to Milwaukee, places like that, and just umpire.
Yeah, well, there weren't that many teams at all in the late '90s. It was still kind of a new competition at the time. But yeah, that's
Right.
pretty awesome that you were able to get involved from like the genesis of the USAFL.
Well, I thought it was my opportunity to give back to the game, kind of thing, and that we didn't have that many umpires, and I had a bit of experience. I'd umpired um, I think I umpired about 76 games in Australia, and about 40 of those were New South Wales State League games. So I had a bit of experience, and just traveling around, and then ended up my first nationals was at '99 in Cincinnati.
And switching over to you, Jeff, don't want to leave you out. You kind of have almost a polar opposite background to Steve because you're a former player. You only became an umpire after your time in Nashville kind of ended, if I'm not wrong. And of course, you were also involved with like the USAFL itself for a while as well, right?
Some of those are right. Yes, I actually am old enough that I remember that the early days of ESPN, before they had any real contracts, used to show not footy games, but they would show footy highlights. And so I knew what footy was when I saw an ad in the Nashville Tennessean, the local paper, that said, "Come on out and see the Nashville Kangaroos against the Boston Demons at 2 o'clock on Saturday afternoon at Elmington Park." And that was in 1998. And I went and saw the game, knowing what Aussie Rules was, and thought, well, this is really cool. It's in my city. Didn't know anything about it other than that. And then in '99, after keeping an eye on the website for the club to see how they did at nationals in '98, and then I watched the team in '99 play, and then I just said, gosh, I just had surgery. So what better way to recover from surgery than pick up a full contact no pad sport at the age of 33? And I did that in 2000. That's how I got involved.
Sounds pretty normal to me.
So that's how I got involved
Yeah,
playing
yeah, no sweat.
back in 2000. And then in 2001, I saw an ad for one of the first umpire clinics and thought, I don't know how long I can play this because I'm already turning 34. So I figured I'll play for a while and then eventually I'll hang the boots up and do the umpiring. So I went to the clinic in 2001, and I've been umpiring really since 2001, ever since that clinic, and I have worked many, many, many games and tournaments with Steve starting in 2001. But I'm still actually playing for the Nashville Kangaroos. So I still haven't hung up the boots yet.
Oh, there you go.
Atlanta, the team that I've been involved with for a long time. Obviously, we had many a meeting at both at Elmington Park there in Nashville and down in Atlanta. And Jeff would always be running around somewhere, maybe in the back line, causing trouble. But you've played what, 150 plus games there in Nashville?
Kangaroos matches, I have over 200.
Over 200.
I hit 200
Wow.
2 seasons ago.
Whoa.
Okay, great.
I think I'm at 215 now or something like that.
Very good. And where are the numbers at for umpiring? Or do you combine? If you umpire half a game and play in the other half, do you get 2 matches for that?
I passed 200 games umpiring so long ago, and somewhere in a computer crash, I lost the records. So I'm probably north of probably 300 or 400 umpiring, but I haven't really umpired that much the last 8 or 10 years because I've been doing a lot of umpire coaching rather than actually umpiring games. So the number of umpired games, to my credit, has gone way down per season, but the number of games that I've coached umpires has gone way up.
Wow, that's pretty cool. And
There you go.
before we move on to another subject, Steve, do you know your umpiring number total?
I think I'm guessing. I do know that I did 76 in Australia because I had the records of that, but I think it's up around 350, something like that.
Wow, it's pretty cool.
Nice.
So, guys, we obviously are in a little bit of a holding pattern with the season at the moment, but what I've been really impressed with over the last couple of years has been the development of the Umpires Association. and also the coaching, as Jeff has already mentioned. Now, tell us about your particular roles within that organisation and how has that been formed? I know Toby, Jeff's brother, has been involved in a lot of that. So, how's it progressed, and what little challenges have we had over the years in solidifying that organisation to what it is today?
Well, we started talking about forming an umpires association quite a few years ago. In fact, we were talking about it when the Nationals were in uh, Baltimore, Washington. And I don't remember exactly what year that was, but it was the early 2000s. And we'd started talking about it then. And it just took a while for it to start to gel. And then we got more people involved who were interested in helping out in the organization of it. And we got encouragement from umpires and coaches who came from Australia, and we started to think, well, we really should form an association, model it on umpires associations in Australia, and just develop umpiring in general. We thought it was a vehicle to develop umpiring. And we're pretty happy with the way it's gone so far. We'd like to have more umpires. We always will, but so far it's been growing well.
And so, what is your role within the organisation, Steve?
I'm the vice president of the association, and I look after legal matters and insurance and other matters as required. I've actually been vice president for a few years now.
And Jeff, now I know a little bit of your history. You've actually umpired in Australia. I know you actually also played in a USA Revolution game. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Right.
I
But
was
you've also umpired at the International Cup down in Australia before. And everyone is pretty jealous because you actually umpired on the MCG.
correct. So back in that 2001 clinic, I was selected at the end of that year, which was 2001, Steve, and that was at Baltimore for that first
Right.
nationals. I was selected to be the first USAFL umpire to go over to the International Cup and the inaugural Cup in 2002. And I was awarded a scholarship to go and become a level 2 field umpire. That was in 2002. And then in 2005, I went back and continued my path to keep my umpiring going. And then in 2008, I actually decided it was time to go play. So I tried out for the Revolution squad and was selected as a player and went and played in a few matches in the 2008 International Cup. And then the 3 cups after that, I've been back as the USAFL umpire coach, and I've been taking umpires starting in 2011 on scholarship to build up the umpire numbers, as Steve was describing earlier.
That's fantastic. And what a testament to like concrete growth of the game, not just in terms of players, but with umpires. And correct me if I'm wrong, Jeff, but you were the first ever non-Australian to get level 2 umpiring accreditation, right?
Correct. So that was from back in the '02. I've been maintaining that accreditation ever since. And then,
Awesome.
as Kraz had mentioned, in 2005 and 2011, I was selected to work the grand final. So I got a chance to umpire on the MCG twice for the International Cup Grand Finals.
Awesome.
That's pretty amazing. I also have read a very small story about you being the only fully bearded umpire on the MCG for like 40 years. Is that right?
I've heard the rumor. One of the coaches that I had over in Australia during my trips there, Neville Nash, I believe that's what he had said when they selected me in 2005 and said, you may be the first. I don't know if they verified that, but he was pretty sure. So I'm going to go with it and say yes.
That's pretty cool. Who did you umpire with that day? Can you remember?
Oh, wow. 2005. I'd have to go back and look it up. I do have upstairs the shirt that I wore and all the umpires for the crew and my coach and Neville all signed that shirt. Brett, if I can remember his last name, I worked with him during the tournament. He actually was selected to work the final back in 2002, and then I saw him in 2005. I don't remember the others that I worked with though, so I'd have to go look it up.
Oh, that's pretty cool. So moving a little forward, we've had some great umpires come across from Australia during this development of the USAFL Umpires Association. I remember a couple of years ago we had a great team from the Riddell League in Victoria, but we've had some others as well. How were those relationships? How were they started? And do we have some ongoing relationships to assist us? I know the AFL umpires have been coming over, Razor Ray and a few of his friends have been coming as well. But do we still have regional umpires in the wings?
We do, and I'll talk about that, and then Steve can jump in on the AFL side. So in the 2014 International Cup tournament, we had one of our, not one of our, but at the time it was the largest contingency of umpires going to the tournament, and it included my brother Toby, who is a goal umpire. He worked in goals one of the games there with the president of the Riddle group, and he invited us to come to training. So he drove us around town, got lunch, went to training, and then at that night it was the first night of finals, and so they were doing their announcing their selections for finals. And so of course we're sitting there in the back saying, "Oh, well, this is how it works over in Australia." And remember, we're sitting in a room of well over 100 umpires, and at the time we had less than 50 umpires in the entire U.S. And this is just one umpire group in Australia with over 100 in the room. And they said, "Well, before we announce the assignments, we have some visitors here from the U.S. And well, I didn't ask them to say anything beforehand. Can come on up and talk about it." So I did, because that's what I do. I'm in sales, and so I went up and talked about the USAFL, the International Cup, and I had said, "Here's what's going on. You know, next year or next time this comes around in 3 years, come on out, be a part of the International Cup. It's a lot of fun." And I said, "But if you do, make sure you don't work with Mad Dog, who was one of the umpires in the group, who was a total wacko, and everybody loved him, and so he thought it was hilarious. And even the goal umpires sitting in the back, who literally don't listen to anything except the goal umpire assignments, started laughing. And so I knew I'd hit a chord. So just like you're laughing now, they all started laughing. And by the way, we have this tournament every year in the U.S. called it's the Nationals tournament. And if you get a chance, it's in October. Come on out. It's a lot of fun." 2 weeks later, the president emails me and says, "I've got 25 people who've raised their hand to come out to the tournament." And I was like, I can't be reading this right. 25 people are going to come out. And then after a couple emails back and forth, they said, "Well, it's too quick. We can't quite arrange it. But what we're doing is we're going to have a series of fundraisers. We're going to come out next year." And that would have been in 2015. And they brought, I believe it was 21 umpires and 3 others as part of their contingency, which was helpful because that was our biggest tournament ever, and we really needed the help. So we've done that with the groups that we've gone over with the International Cup, and we've gone to Essendon, and we've gone to Riddle, and we've gone to Northern, and we've gone to Eastern, and several of the umpire groups there to say, "Hey, we're here. Here's what we're doing. Come on out, visit us. We want to build the relationships." And so we actually have those relationships on our website now, and we're trying to keep those relationships going. And that's why we're getting the local umpires to come on out and be a part of our tournament every year.
Yeah, that's a fantastic initiative that you guys are doing, and yeah, obviously, just the umpire associations, like you said, Jeff, in Australia, they're pretty serious and they're pretty big too. So it's good to rub elbows with those guys and learn from them as much as you can. And you mentioned your brother Toby got involved. How did that happen? Did you have to twist his arm, or what got him involved as well?
Involved in footy or involved in umpiring, or both?
Both.
So, so back in 2000, when I was going to start playing for the Kangaroos, I told my brother, "Hey, I'm going to go out and I'm going to go to this tryouts for the Nashville Kangaroos." And he said, "Well, hang on, I'll go with you." He had no idea what it was. He jumps in the car and says, "So, what is this whole Nashville Kangaroos thing?" And so I tried to explain. So we get there, and John Nelson, who was the head coach at the time, had said, "Hey, you need to write a check for $50." I said, "Well, we're here for tryouts." He said, "Well, that is the tryouts. So if you can write a check for $50, you make the team." So we made the team because we were able to write a check for $50 and join. We played all those years, and Toby actually quit playing in 2006 because of a foot condition that he had to have surgery for. And because I was umpiring, he decided, well, let me go try the umpiring. So he couldn't run around because of his foot, but he was able to do the goal umpiring, and he's been goal umpiring ever since. And then after he went to Australia on that trip that I had mentioned, he was elevated to the head coach of goal umpires for the USAFL, and he's been doing that along with the USAFL Nationals tournament director for the umpires ever since. So that's how he kind of got
Nice.
involved in the umpiring aspect.
Very cool.
So, Steve, let's talk about the AFL umpires who have been very prominent over the last couple of years, especially. at the national tournament. What is the relationship there, and how did that all start?
It actually goes back it goes back to my beginnings because the first nationals that I did in '99, we actually had Hayden Kennedy come and
Okay.
umpire at the tournament. So I was thinking I've had some highlights of umpiring that I've enjoyed very much, but probably one of the biggest ones was doing the Nationals Grand Final with Hayden Kennedy in '99. So, and then after that, we had AFL umpires come out for nationals primarily and help out with doing some umpiring and coaching. He wasn't. I don't think he was ever an umpire, but Kevin Sheedy has always been a big proponent of football in the US back in Australia and helped encourage umpires and others to come to the US. And then more recently, we've developed links with the AFL umpires, and we've had large contingents of AFL umpires in addition to Riddle and Essendon districts and so on. And the huge thing for us is not only have they done umpiring for us, but increasingly recently they've been doing a lot of coaching. And so that's really expanded the skills and expertise of the umpires that we have here.
Yeah, I've got to agree, Steve. There, the professionalism and the way umpires are managing the games these days has really gone through the roof in comparison to what we were putting up. Maybe putting up was probably not a great word, but local people just coming down to umpire a game because they knew the game in Australia, and that is what USAFL footy started with. Basically, nearly all places around the country where maybe these two guys weren't attending, but really these days the coaching side of things, and let's maybe touch on how many umpires do we have now registered in the USAFL.
We have our last meeting, we sort of count them by the number of umpires who register with the USAFL. So we have around about 40 to 50 by the time everybody's registered for the season. Sometimes it's been higher than that. At nationals, we've had over 60 umpires registered. So it's certainly more than we had back in the day.
And you have umpires accreditation meetings and also training at regionals and things like that and camps. How is that being managed at the moment? And is that your job, Jeff?
Yeah, that falls to me as the head coach. And so it's been about 5 years now that we started doing the umpire clinics at the regional tournaments, in addition to doing the umpire clinic at the nationals, which we've done every year that I can remember, which goes back 20 years now. And so we tried to have 3 and 4 umpire clinics during the season to help the umpires before the end of the year. And then that would lead into the nationals to help them get ready, where we actually would do the evaluations and the accreditation. So the clinics during the year, where we have anywhere from, say, 6 or 8 at some of the less well-attended ones to upwards of 20 or 25 during the season, get them ready, get them on the pathway to get their accreditation. And then we can do the evaluations at the nationals to say, are they at the threshold where they would get level 1 or level 2? And we do that for goals as well as we're doing it for the field, which the goals are newer. We've added that, but we've been doing the fields for about 5 or 6 years now with that formal process.
Yeah, that's a pretty logical system. I definitely think that it's, if it ain't broke, don't fix it, right? So I think that's a good system that you guys have. And my question, kind of piggybacking off of that, is what's the process like for getting accredited umpires eligible for the International Cup? Do they have to pass another assessment, or is it if you're at level 1 or level 2, you're already, good to go?
Sure. So the way it works is we follow the AFL umpires accreditation process. And so that includes an online course that is required, and that gets you on the pathway. And then in addition to that, you need to attend a clinic because the accreditation process requires both practical and theoretical. So the testing online, which you get your certificate for, send that in, that's your theoretical, obviously. And then the practical is, okay, you've read the rule book and you're able to answer questions about it. Can you actually go on the field and blow the whistle? And that's what the practical is all about.
Right.
So we do that. And when you start out, you're at level 0. And then you go to level 1, which is the first formal accreditation. And then to get to the highest level that we can do here outside of Australia, which is level 2, then it's a much higher level of requirement. Are you doing more game management stuff as opposed to just knowing the basics? So the process is starting at level 0, which we invented here in the US because we didn't have anything to go off of from Australia. In Australia, when you start out, you're just an umpire with no formal accreditation until you get level 1. So we created level 0 so we could say, hey, we've got umpires that are at least at this certain threshold. And then you go from there to 1 and then 2. The International Cup requires level 2. And so my job is, if we're going to send somebody over there, is to make sure that if they're not at level 2 before they go, that they're really going there to be evaluated and get the accreditation to be level 2. And that's really what I did back in 2002. I got my level 2 when I was over there. And so that's the pathway that we have set up for the field umpires.
Cool.
Now, I was lucky enough to, or unlucky enough to umpire a game at last year's regionals in Raleigh on the East Coast. And you have a new, very innovative way of coaching now. We get wired for sound. Even though we had a couple of little technical problems keeping those earplugs in our ears, how long have we been doing that? And what sort of advantages, disadvantages have you found with that new system of being wired for, getting feedback immediately, obviously?
Yeah, absolutely. So we actually bought the sets last year and used them in Arizona at a clinic there for the very first time at the Rob Dollar Clinic. And the difference that it makes is when we're not using that type of audio connection with the umpires on the field, we literally have to go the entire 20 minutes and then go on field for the 2-minute halftime and do as fast as we can to give any feedback to the umpire so they can go out for the second half and hopefully apply what we said inside of 2 minutes so they can make improvements. That's the way it's been up until then. And what we do now is we're able to talk to them as they go. And I can actually help them in positioning and other things on the field as they go.
I remember that day very well, Jeff, because you were yelling at me, "You're running the wrong way, Kraz. You're running the wrong way."
It's just like a player who gets turned around and kicks to the wrong goal, right?
I know. How stupid is that?
So it's a fantastic tool. I loved it when I used it. I used it literally all day for 9 consecutive hours, and I was able, and John Mills and I, the current president, we were able to literally coach for 9 consecutive hours, 2 umpires at a time, all day long. And you can literally see improvements from the minute, almost minute by minute within the quarter as the umpires are getting feedback. You can tell them where to position, you can help them move, you can tell them it was a good decision, you can tell them to watch where their partner is, and so on and so forth. And they make those adjustments as they go.
Yeah, that immediate encouragement and affirmation of you doing things well would do wonders, because they're obviously getting yelled at by players, unfortunately, about bad decisions and things like that, and the crowd. But for you to able to affirm that decision immediately would do wonders. I'd love that system. If I could have those for like 18 players when I'm coaching and be able to tell them where to go, that would be awesome. We'll get there.
Exactly.
We'll get there.
Hmm.
So the coaching, so you not only do coaching for field umpires, you do coaching for boundary umpires and goal umpires as well, yeah?
We do, and there's just a very small amount of boundary coaching, which I do, and there's only been like 1 or 2 that have actually wanted to do the boundary side of it. And then from the goal umpire side, Toby handles all of that, and that's really his milieu. So he's literally focused 100% of his time on goal umpires at the tournaments, at the nationals, and at the international cup. So that's everything falls to him, and how he has his group of umpires that are senior. Because we've got a number of field level 2 goal umpires as well, some of whom have been over to the international cup, and we're planning on sending more over the next several international cups to really build up the goal umpire side of it as well.
Wow, that's pretty cool, pretty cool. Now, just prior to coming on air, we were talking to Steve about traveling around the country to umpire, and he'd mentioned there was a possibility that he was going to come down to the Savannah tournament to umpire. And I know things are in a bit of a holding pattern at the moment for the current, maybe the next 2 months. What sort of plans have you to put together for different tournaments around the country? I know we have regionals that are in Denver, Denver, Dallas, and Cincinnati. But are there other events that you're sending umpires to and doing coaching at, if they go ahead?
Steve, you want to jump on that, or you want me to?
No, you can start on that. I mean, I know we talk about this every meeting. We, as an umpires association, we meet electronically once a month, and depending on the time of year, we're focused on more on actual tournaments and nationals and so on. But we have a good feel for which umpires are available to go to regional tournaments, and increasingly we're having umpires going to non-regional tournaments and actually doing just games. I mean, clubs will contact us and say, "Can anybody umpire at a particular game or tournament?"
Yeah, that's kind of what we deal with in SoCal because it's being switched up a little bit this year. But in the past, with Metro season, when we do round robins in LA with San Diego or OC, a lot of times we have to get creative in terms of the umpiring. Sometimes USAFL accredited people aren't always available, but 9 times out of 10, we can usually call someone up or have OC or San Diego ring someone up, and hopefully we'll have someone who can, who knows what he's doing. But yeah, that can be a bit of a challenge when it comes to just regular games as opposed to tournaments. Like, it can definitely be difficult to find people who are able to travel at the drop of a hat or, just happen to be in town when there's a game going on. Like, obviously that can be a bit of a minefield, but it's cool that that's happening though, that like individual umpires who just happen to be around can pitch in for an afternoon.
One of the interesting developments over the last couple of years, which I in total agree in, has been that clubs now have to pay for accredited umpires who attend your games. That's correct, yeah?
It is. It's one of those things that we've been talking about. Steve mentioned how long ago we started thinking about just having a UA, an umpire association. And as we slowly ramp up, one of the things we've done was to encourage accreditation, as you mentioned. And one of the ways we did that was at nationals, we actually pay our umpires according to their accreditation level and not according to what level of match they're doing. And so they don't really care if they're at a level 1 or level 5 in terms of the match. They're going to get paid based on their accreditation. And magically, everybody wanted to get accredited all of a sudden. Just go figure, right? And so what we've been able to do, yeah, exactly. So since then, what we're now pushing for is to require the clubs to get credit for their games, is to not just have anybody grab a whistle and say, "I'll do it," because they can spell AFL. We really have been pushing to get the USAFL to require that a USAFL UA accredited umpire be on the field and control the match. And that doesn't mean it has to be a level 2 or even a level 1. It just has to be somebody who's at least started down the pathway of that level 0. And so all of a sudden, clubs are contacting us saying, "How do we do that? And when is the next clinic? And we know we have to have this." It's not for this year. It's not probably going to happen for next year, but they know it's coming. And just like everything else, it's going to happen in phases. So it's going to start out as, it's coming. So in 21 or maybe in 22, you're going to have this. So start training umpires and get them accredited. That pushes people into the fold, if you will, helps us track the numbers to go back to the AFL and say, "Hey, we don't have 40 or 50 umpires. We've actually got 120, and they're all doing this, this, and this, and these are the accreditations we're doing, et cetera." So it's not just trying to make it miserable for the clubs to have one more thing to manage. That's the kind of thing that is going to help the USAFL go back to the AFL and say, "Hey, we're not just trying to play a few games here. We're building this at every level, coaching, umpiring, and players, and you should continue to support us in that endeavor to grow every part of footy here in the US." So that is true. It's coming. And ideally, we're going to get to the point where goal umpires will have to be accredited and so on and so forth. Those things that are years down the road that we're planning for already today.
Yeah, I reckon that's also a pretty good plan. And it's kind of like it might seem, from a club's perspective, it might seem like a headache at the time, but hey, if there are poorly trained umpires, players get upset, and that's no good for anyone. So you might as well make the investment to, make sure that you have enough in the budget for officially accredited umpires. So can't go wrong with that.
Exactly.
So between you two guys, you probably have 700, 800 games that you've umpired or played in, as in Jeff's case. You must have some pretty interesting stories you could tell us, or some pretty funny stories about one particular game maybe that you thought was pretty ironical. So can you pass on some of those tidbits that maybe that you just talk to other umpires about that you can pass on to our listeners?
Steve, why don't you start with that one?
A few inside jokes.
Well, I was
Yeah.
just trying to think what games would stick out.
Like goals after the siren and those sorts of things, I'm sure are probably right up there.
One game I do remember was and I can't remember where it was, national championships. We had grand final, and I was doing it with our glorious president, umpire Mills, and this was the game where I eventually persuaded him that he should at least create the illusion of movement on the field. But it was the game. It was the game where it was just blowing a gale, and it turned out that the team that actually won the tournament had a really, really good footballer playing for them. Turned out he really, really shouldn't have been playing for them, and because he'd just come from a season in South Australia, and so that was a game that I remember quite well. Jeff, you can have a go, and I'll try and think of something else that stood out.
There are so many. Kraz, I'll say one that you might remember. It happened in Colorado Springs, and that was the Ice Bowl where we had the ice storms on Saturday. So I was umpiring a women's match, and it was coming down hard. And I'm running around. Of course, I've got my shirts on. I'm going out to the wing. There's two players running after ball, and one of them suddenly clocks her opponent with an elbow, and I couldn't. It took me about 3 seconds to figure out that she'd actually done something that needed to be reported, and it took me a while to get my whistle going. And had to report her. So that was the first time I'd ever reported a female player. But it was in the middle of an ice storm. So I remember after the game and going to there with the coaches and the players, I'm sitting there freezing and shivering, trying to get the tribunal done because they have to get done immediately. And somebody, I can't remember who it was, but bless their heart, they said, "Can I go get you some cocoa or something?" I said, "Sure, that would be good."
A little bribery maybe in that little cold tent there huddled on the hill in Colorado Springs.
Oh my God. Because then we went down to the hotel afterwards, and it was sunny down there at the hotel 1,000 feet lower. I remember that clear as a bell. That was an interesting one.
I've heard many stories about how crazy that year was, and it totally makes sense why we've never gone back to Colorado in October.
I did a goal umpire. I did a goal umpiring a game as a goal umpire, and that was probably the worst experience I ever had goal umpiring in Colorado Springs. I do remember tribunals are one, or reports are one thing that sometimes crop up. I do remember one. My policy was to try and say, players, calm down a bit. And so if I copped some abuse, I'd say something like, "Are you talking to me?" And you would expect the answer no, and often it was. But there was one day when, of course, I bleeping am. So I said, "All right, well, you got the yellow card. Now you're getting the red card for stupidity."
That's pretty cool. Was that at a Nationals?
No, I think it was a regional somewhere. I can't remember the game, but
Yeah, like all the players, when Jeff mentioned the games in Colorado Springs in, I think it was 2008, was that tournament, the Nationals there. I had never been so cold in all my life. And I was marking the fields with Tommy Ellis like a day prior in 75 degrees. It was absolutely crazy. But yeah, and I do remember I was in that tent with you, Jeff, because one of my players was involved in that particular incident on the women's team. So pretty interesting how you remember stuff like that. Well, guys, it's been absolutely fantastic to talk to you. I probably talk all day about footy and stuff, or even about umpires, even though, we don't always agree on things. And I certainly haven't agreed with Jeff over the years. He's probably umpired I think I've played maybe 30 or 40 games against Nashville, so he's probably umpired quite a few of those, but he also comes out on the field sometimes after half time and gives me an elbow, so, he levels up a little bit. So, but great.
And I only had to yellow card you once.
Yeah, exactly. There you go. I'm clean.
That's okay. I don't always agree with. I don't always agree with Jeff
Oh,
either.
there you go, Jeffrey. Here we go.
Well, that reminds me of a really funny event when Steve left his shoes at a tournament, and I brought them with me. And he actually had the gall to submit his resignation, saying he was too old and was going to quit. I said, "You're not getting your shoes back unless you withdraw your resignation."
There you go.
And he's still umpiring, so he obviously withdrew his resignation. So there's another story for you.
It was the threat of the shoes. That's going to work every time.
For sure. Hey, a bit of bribery or, threats or whatever don't go a long way in footy circles. That happens every day in a footy club. So, as I said, guys, great to have you on. And like I said at the start of the show tonight, we don't really know what's going to happen, but and as I've said a couple of times before, I've been really impressed the way the USAFL Umpires Association has come together, especially over the last couple of years with the coaching and the feedback. I've even been able to get a small accreditation myself, which I never thought I would ever do. But just through that encouragement process, it just shows that it works. And I'm someone who wants to play till I'm, got 2 feet in the grave. So. But well done. And if there's anyone else you want to shout out to now, someone else who has helped this process, give them a shout out now, and we'll see if they might listen to this sometime in the future.
Well, I think there's one that I know pretty well because she's one of our female umpires in the US, and we're lucky to have her in Minnesota. Minnesota is a bit spoiled having 2 level 2 field umpires and 2 accredited goal umpires. But Laurie Roop has done a terrific job in developing the international connections that the USAFL UA has now. Not just Australia, but Europe, and she's umpired in South America. So certainly a shout out to Laurie.
Cool.
Yeah, definitely for Laurie. She's the first level 2 field umpire and is moving into the coaching aspect of it. So she is just the bright star of the future. And we want many, many more Lauries in our group if we can find them at all. And then the other I'd probably mention is Doug Drinkwater, who comes from the AFL, and he's been at 5 nationals now, is really helping us keep the connections with the AFL umpires group and making sure that we're getting resources from them and getting the connections not only to the local leagues, but to the AFL. So he's been instrumental in helping us with that.
Right, fantastic. So if someone is listening to this podcast, maybe a former player or even a current player who would like to get involved in umpiring, where would you suggest they go first? And, what sort of information would they have to give up?
I'd go to the USAFL UA website and check out the resources there. I think that's where I'd start.
Well, it's going to give out Steve's home number. Yeah, that's definitely the place to start. Log on there. You can connect up to the entire board and the coaching staff through the contact us part of it. All the accreditation process is listed there. All the events are listed there. We put all of our history there, all the scholarship winners, et cetera. There's a lot of information, including manuals, et cetera, to really help somebody get started.
So there is some training modules available, even just to look at for free. Yeah, you don't have to be accredited. You could just go on there and get some tips, right?
Oh yeah, absolutely. There's several levels and for multiple accreditation or for multiple disciplines, goal and field and boundary.
All right. And what's the URL of that website again, Jeff?
It's usaflua.com.
Excellent. Well, guys, good luck for the rest of the season. I hope we really have a season and we get to see you guys out there and keep improving, keep doing what you're doing. We're really going forward in this part of our game here in the US. So I'm very impressed myself, and I think plenty of other people are too. Thanks for coming on tonight.
Appreciate you guys.
Thanks for having us, Kraz.
Have a good one, fellas. See you soon.
Outside 50 is brought to you with the help of Play Aussie USA. Play Aussie is the only place in the USA you can buy the famous Sharon football, a proud sponsor of the USAFL. Visit them at playaussie.com.